The Cochran firm stands for integrity. I think that's the core of everything that runs through our firm. When we accept your case and you come in, you become a client of the Cochran firm, you're part of our family. We're going to treat you like family. We're going to do the right thing with your case. We have the resources necessary to go toe-to-toe with anybody. If you've been injured, we'd be honored to help you. Call the Cochran firm today. We will go the extra mile to do the right thing.
Preparation, preparation, preparation. We instill that in all of our staff members to be the best they can be for our clients.
No matter what the injury, Johnny Cochran made sure the Cochran firm always worked hard for you. Whether you're hurt in a car accident, a medical mistake by a doctor or a hospital, harmed by a big drug company, or you have a loved one who's abused in a nursing home, the Cochran firm is here today to help you. Just call the Cochran firm at 1-800-THE-FIRM.
The GOP has always been the anti-science Republican Party, and recently they've brought the fight against scientific advancement into the House of Representatives. Joining me now to talk about the House Science Committee's war on science is attorney Karen Evans. Karen, what's very apparent is that you have a science committee with the House of Representatives that has just declared war on intelligence. I mean, it's not just science, it's on just absolute intelligence.
I couldn't agree more, Mike. I don't understand how one GOP control committee is waging war on science. It seems like there should be something that we should be able to do to stop that, because it creates, what I think it's creating is a public safety hazard. Because we've got folks who now are trying to basically usurp the role of the EPA and all the scientists and the science behind that organization, and it's going to create a public health situation for Americans.
Well, I think one way that they accomplish that, Karen, if you think about it, it begins by them being shameless. I mean, it's almost as if they aren't concerned about what the image is. The hearings that they've had on the climate change, it's looked like a frat boy. Festival. I mean, a festival of ignorance, where you have this cast of Animal House-like characters without brains attacking real life scientists that have all of the information that shows that global climate change is real. 97% of all the credible scientists say it's real. But it looks like a frat boy setting, as if they don't have any shame. Isn't that kind of your impression here?
That's absolutely my impression. And the problem with that, though, is that, one, it's an embarrassment. It's a national embarrassment, because I don't think America is alone in this quest that climate change is a result of human activity. And so to have our House of Representatives and this committee speaking in such a way, it makes America look terrible. It's a national embarrassment.
It's always money, isn't it? I mean, if you really drill down here, Karen, this is about money again, isn't it?
It is absolutely about money. It's not about science at all. And it should be about science. I think what we're talking about is that it should be about green science and not green money. And that's what it comes down, because we've got Republicans and a GOP agenda, which is running amok, all for the sake of trying to continue with their fraternization and over-influence, I would say, by industry, those in the oil, coal, and natural gas businesses. And that's going to impact on Americans, and in fact, our world as we know it. I want the world to be around when my son and my son's children are alive. And I want it to be a world in which we can live and not be sickened by the air that we breathe and the water that we drink.
Well, you almost have to wonder whether these buffoons that are running this science committee in the House of Representatives even have a family. Because if you have a child, how do you possibly sit there and talk this idiot talk? How do you possibly do that?
I don't understand it, because it is science. I don't know they have no credible studies that rebut the science that we're relying on for these regulations that we are trying to enact. And I think it's a shame that a committee like this would, one, try to get involved into, well, let me just say it this way. Politics should not be involved in science. Science should be non-political, and it should be based on peer review and evidence-based science, not politics. And that's what the problem is right now.
You have a good many critics coming out, and I'm just wondering what your reaction to this is that yes, it is the money. The lobbyists have taken over the committee. And as a matter of fact, you see a lot of committee members leaving the committee and going to work for the industry.
Right.
But isn't the other part of it, you hear critics saying that maybe they are just, and this is not my words, but you hear these exact words in one form or fashion, and that is maybe they're just too stupid to be evil, that these representatives that are, hugely out of Texas, hugely out of Arkansas, Oklahoma, all the oil states, that maybe they really are too stupid. Maybe they didn't learn science themselves. What is your reaction to that? I mean, and these people, this criticism is not flippant criticism. It is they genuinely don't understand what they're talking about.
Well, I don't claim to be an expert, but I've read about this, and I think within an hour of reading from real science, you understand the issue. And so I don't think it's real stupidity. I think it's greed, and I think it's their desire to push the GOP agenda without really thinking about the long-term impact that this is going to have on our world.
Well, don't we have, I want your reaction on this. I've been fairly critical of this president, even though I did everything I could to get him elected twice. I still feel like we have to stand up and be critical at the right time. Isn't there a lot of things that this president can do by way of executive order to override what's happening in the Republican-held House of Representatives?
I would think that he should be able to do things, but he's been so thwarted in his efforts that I don't really know about that. I would hope that he could do something. I know that he should do something.
Well, you're right up there in Washington, D.C., and you see the Environmental Protection Agency under assault. You see the National Science Foundation under assault. And it's always the same people that are saying, let's close down the EPA, let's close down the National Science Foundation. And it's always somebody who's working for the Republican Party and working for the oil industry at the same time.
Absolutely. And that over-influence is affecting policy. And this committee, above all committees, because it's the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, should be about objective data and not partisan politics. And the fact that the GOP is pushing this agenda through this committee is very troublesome. It's very troublesome because we've got non-elected staffers creating policy that is derived not for the benefit of the public, but for the benefit of these industry influences. We've got these congressmen taking all this money from oil and gas and coal, and it's influencing the politics, which are now impacting public safety.
Yeah. Karen Evans, thank you for joining me, okay?
Thank you for having me. I think with my background as a nurse, that helps me as a lawyer because, well, the way I see it is basically it's kind of the same thing. I went into nursing because I wanted to help people. And as a lawyer, I can do the same thing. I can help people. When a client chooses you to be their lawyer, they chose you because they think you can help. And I feel a tremendous obligation to help in whatever way I can with my clients. If you've been injured, call the Cochran firm today. There's nothing more rewarding than resolving a case favorably for a client.
We never quit. We never back up. We never give up.
The Cochran firm fights for injured people every day and stands up for people when nobody else will. If you've been hurt, just call the Cochran firm at 1-800-THE-FIRM.
You've probably seen the headlines here and there about the massive recall of General Motors vehicles taking place, but if you didn't own one of the defective vehicles, you probably didn't dig too deep into the story. But this issue goes far beyond General Motors, and it represents a culture of corruption that has gripped nearly every major corporation in America. Joining me now to tell this story is attorney David Haynes. So, David, a lot of people might not have been paying attention to this General Motors recall. I'd pointed out before, if you don't own a GM vehicle, you may not think that it applies to you, but this is a very massive recall, 27 million vehicles, and it represents what is happening throughout industries all over America. Tell us the story. Where did this start with this GM recall issue?
It really is an unprecedented recall, Farron, that we'll go over. And as you said, even if you or a loved one doesn't own one of these vehicles, there are millions of them on the road. So if you're driving a vehicle or you're riding in a vehicle, you need to be concerned about this recall, because as one parent who lost a daughter who was a third-year law student at Washington Lee University said, these are essentially Scud missiles waiting to go off on our highways. This is an incident, this case and the story has been breaking this year, but unfortunately this is something that General Motors has known for almost up to a decade, but they have concealed in their own internal operations, and that is that there was just a not too complicated an issue, but it was a problem with the ignition switch, and basically that the spring in there was not strong enough, and so when the car is being operated, it can be turned off for a couple of different reasons. Either if your keys are real heavy, if somebody's knee hits the key or the ignition. These are all very small cars, most of them like the Saturn Ion or the Cobalt and these sort of things. They're small passenger compartments. And what happens is the ignition spring is not strong enough. The car can then cut off while it's going 70 miles an hour down the road. And if it then crashes, you lose steering power, and it'll crash in another car and the airbag won't deploy because the ignition's not on. So this is, it goes without saying how dangerous this is. GM is claiming only 13 deaths or as a result of this, but we know it is many, many times that.
And so the faulty part is a spring, a small little spring within that ignition switch. You stick your key in there and you turn it, and there's a spring mechanism in there, and that's what's faulty. That is what has caused this entire issue here?
Exactly, and they knew essentially when this was being manufactured about 10 years ago. There's actually evidence now that's coming out that GM engineers knew that this spring wasn't even going to meet the minimum safety requirements initially when it was first produced. Then it became clear over the years that they had a problem, they had a defect, but it was covered up by the engineers. It then was covered up by the lawyers. There were dozens of different lawsuits trying to get to the bottom of this. Their private law firms that they hired were covering this up in documents. Other lawyers around the country didn't know what was happening in the other cases, but GM did. A number of people in the legal department and the engineering department have been fired this year, but it hasn't gone high enough. Reforms have not gone high enough internally with GM, and it shows the kind of culture of just a cover-up, which is plagues really a lot of our corporate culture. Unfortunately, they're not putting safety first. They're putting profits first. They're scared of just doing these recalls in the first place, and instead they go years and years, and many deaths could have been prevented, dozens. It's another situation where the car manufacturers don't learn, just fix it in the first place, do the recall. Now here we are, 27 recalls this year, 27 million vehicles. It's incredible, and it's a senseless loss of life. And so we need change. Obviously, Mr. Milliken needs to go. He's blaming on his underlings who've been fired. Mary Barra is standing behind him apparently. But many members of Congress yesterday in the Senate were calling for him to be terminated. That needs to happen immediately. And we need to have real reform, or otherwise we're going to continue to see this sort of a corporate neglect and putting profits over safety.
And when this all started happening at first, she seemed very sympathetic. She met with the families of victims. She said, don't worry, we're going to make this right. And then she shows up in the Senate, which is, I believe the third or fourth time she's had to go to Congress and testify. And her whole attitude about the situation has changed. They're no longer willing to turn over documents about their internal investigations. And, they're not wanting to, they're trying to get out of some of the payments through bankruptcy reorganization. And it seems like the whole attitude has changed. And I'm not an attorney. I've worked around attorneys for over a decade now, though, and you have to see those as red flags. If you were to kind of give us an insight into what she might be thinking, why would she suddenly refuse to cooperate?
Well, absolutely. GM is worried. We have seen sort of a change in tack. Now, they've rolled out a compensation program, which is being headed up by Ken Feinberg, but there are limitations on the amount of recovery there. Families need to consult with counsel if they want to pursue one of these cases and see what their rights are, what their opportunities are. Obviously, if this is a matter which is put in front of a jury and we have the information that we have now, which GM knew or very clearly knew of the problem yet failed to act, In my opinion, there could be significant compensation over and above what's being offered by GM. And now you see Mary Barra, she is backtracking. She's saying that they may assert the bankruptcy privilege and so forth. We'll be prepared to fight that on any of these cases that we're involved in. The information there and the documentation that this was a cover-up, that this was preventable is clear. And this is a case, a very clear case of corporate neglect, and this company needs to be held accountable.
Well, David, I'm glad we have people like you out there fighting for us. David Haynes, thanks for joining us today.
We train our lawyers to be the best they can be, to carry out the best job they can for each and every one of our clients.
Johnny Cochran founded the Cochran firm to help injured people fight against giant corporations and powerful insurance companies. Whether you're hurt in a wreck by someone's careless mistake or harmed by a drug from a company that puts profits over people, the Cochran firm is here to fight for you now. Just call the Cochran firm at 1-800-THE-FIRM.
The decision to place a loved one in a nursing home is a difficult one. You trust that the nursing home you select will provide proper care, but sometimes that trust is betrayed and our loved ones are neglected, which can lead to serious injuries or even death. I'm Karen Evans, a registered nurse and attorney at the Cochran firm. If you suspect a loved one is being mistreated in a nursing home, call us now. We'll help find out what went wrong. Call the Cochran firm today.
Joining me now for more on this is David Haynes, managing attorney for the Cochran firm in D.C. and Baltimore. David, I got to tell you, what's happening right now is these new you see pharmaceutical companies out buying these mega deals. What's that all about, the big mega drug company?
It's just the age of the mega merger is what we're looking at. And why is this being done? It's for pure increased corporate profitability and so that these companies can avoid taxes. It's all about taxes, saving money, saving the bottom line, shilling the American taxpayer while they charge us for overpriced drugs.
Well, think about here's what's so ugly about that. First of all, they don't want to pay taxes in the United States. They're starting these mergers overseas to avoid paying taxes. But you can bet they sure want the Medicare dollars. They sure want the Medicaid dollars. They'll take that money, but they don't want to pay anything back into the system. Another thing that really is interesting to me, almost $3 billion spent on lobbying by the drug industry just in the last few years. $3 billion. What does $3 billion buy for a drug company like Merck or Pfizer or Lilly or Johnson & Johnson?
You can guarantee that they're not spending $3 billion just for the health, or just in case. It's buying access, it's buying special privileges. As you said with Medicare, it's ensuring that the 2006 loophole that there's no negotiation the Medicare can do for these drug companies stays inflated.
Well, let's talk about that just a moment. Most people don't understand. Can you imagine we have a setting now where the government, Medicare, can't say to the drug company, I want to negotiate your price because you have a markup of 5,000%. Now, that is a startling number, but that's a real number, isn't it? There are some companies with a 5,000% markup on their little pill. But we're saying to them, oh, gee whiz, you're prohibited from negotiating.
Other groups can negotiate, but Medicare cannot. The federal government cannot. And so you see why the lobbyists, do you think big oil, the defense industry, they're all spending lobbying dollars? They must know who's spending more, the pharmaceutical industry. They're the ones who have the armies of lobbyists that are out here in the city, in the steakhouses, wining and dining our legislators for special protection for the pharmaceutical industries, which are spending money in the billions of dollars because they know it's money that's going to be returned to them 10, 20, 100-fold.
So what it does, David, it allows them, I take it then, to buy price fixing. In other words, yes, you're a special industry, you can engage in antitrust, you can engage in price fixing, that's fine. What other things that it does is it's a get-out-of-jail-free card when they spend $3 billion lobbying in it.
It's across the board. You talk about price fixing, antitrust, pay for delay. American consumers need to know what that is. When a drug is prepared to come off a patent and generics can enter the space so that drug prices will come down, the branded company just buys them off on multi-million-dollar deals and so that the patient loses. So
okay, let me get this right. Let me get this right.
You have a Pfizer company or a Merck company making a gazillion dollars off of Medicare, off of taxpayers, gazillions of dollars. I mean, the numbers are staggering. So this company says, we have this drug on the market, and if it moves over to the generic, we're going to lose money. So they work out a deal with the generic. No, they're paid under the table.
What will happen is the generic will begin to develop a drug. It takes years, and then there'll be a patent. There's sometimes patent litigation, but then lo and behold, there's a settlement between Pfizer and the generic, and they pay them millions of dollars, sometimes $50 million a year for multi-year deals to keep the generic out of the space. Anyone can understand that that's anti-competitive, antitrust, and the loser, of course, is the consumer, the patient, and their medication is being denied to people who need it the most.
I'm working on 2 cases right now, you're familiar with them, where we have actually seen the industry phony up clinical data. Absolutely make it up, send it to the FDA. The dysfunctional FDA doesn't have enough sense to even ask the right questions. What ends up happening is the drug makes it through and ends up killing people. Tonight we're going to be talking about transvaginal mesh, one good example. Destroying the lives of women everywhere because the FDA was dysfunctional, but also because the company, Johnson & Johnson, we're going to be talking about, phonies up a bunch of information about the safety of that. How do you ever stop it? Really, how do you ever do anything about the power of an industry that can spend $3 billion lobbying our government?
Well, we need to have appropriate safeguards, and we need to stop giving the pharmaceutical industry a free pass. I mean, we need to have FDA, you said, is powerless. They can't police all of this. A lot of it will result to firms such as ours, which are having to prosecute these cases civilly, but it shouldn't get that far, that patients are injured and killed. And so obviously we need real reform on Capitol Hill, but will that ever happen when these lobbyists have them in their back pocket?
Well, what we see, this is the new Eric Holder thing. This is the new, the new Justice Department is, we don't really throw people in jail when they kill other people as long as they have a 3-piece suit on and as long as they have an Armani tie and a Rolex watch. We don't throw them in jail. What do we do to them?
Well, we just give them a fine, and it's just a cost of business for these companies at this point. I mean, it's an elite club. It's a membership card that if you're willing to pay $1 billion fine, you can do whatever you want, and it's a get out of free jail card is exactly what it is. And until the government wakes up and we have some real prosecutions instead of these deferred prosecution agreements, which are purely civil in nature, then we're not going to see any real reform.
Real quickly, David, this president came into office, I'm going to reform all this, I'm going to get the FDA under control, I'm going to get Wall Street under control. What has he done? Name anything you can tell me that this president has done to make the drug industry do what the rest of corporations should be doing, and that's to play fair. What has he done?
No reforms come to mind. I mean, Hatch-Waxman is teethless in a lot of ways. We don't see any reform coming out of the White House. Instead, what we really see is a revolving door among the administration out to big law right down the street, where they're then working for these companies after a couple years stint over in the administration or in the Justice Department. And so these prosecutions need to get real. When we have this criminal conduct and people are dying as a result, individuals need to be held responsible.
Well, that's the nature of the business, and the only way to change it is to keep going after them in courtrooms all over this country. That's what you do. David Haynes, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Pat.
My dedication, my desire to be the best that we can be for all of our clients.
If you've been hurt, put the power of the Cochran firm on your side and get the money you really deserve. Just call the Cochran firm at 1-800-THE-FIRM.